Welcome on into Forward Progress, presented by Fanduel Sportsbook. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, with our usual cast of characters. We have Suma, Judah, and of course TA from Cleve Analytics. And as always, on the Monday edition of Forward Progress, we're going to start by talking about some key takeaways from Week 6. We're going to discuss some future bets to make, as well as some look-ahead lines for Week 7. Then, as always, we're going to finish off with tonight's Monday night football game, and Judah's going to cook up a same-game parlay. So make sure you stick around, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's dive right in, gentlemen. So first things first from Week 6. We have to talk about rookie sensation Jayden Daniels. Now, Daniels, something to note about the Washington Commanders. They lost by 7 this week, and as our good friend GRP wins, this was a game where the number actually mattered here, something he doesn't like to talk about. Washington pushes on the +7. If you took Baltimore minus 6.5, you won. But regardless, we're not even discussing the side impact there. We want to talk about Jayden Daniels and how impressive he looked in that loss. Now, this is a Washington team, of course, that had the second overall pick last year and now is finally looking like a competitive football team. So even after losing by a touchdown, it still was an impressive showing for the Washington Commanders. I know TA and Suma, you guys both have thoughts on Jayden Daniels and what he was able to do in this loss. And we're going to start with you, TA. Talk to me about what Daniels did on Sunday that was impressive outside of just the eye test and watching him play.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have all the numbers on me, but I know he had a top 10, EPA game. And just watching it, I was on the Ravens at the 6.5, so I watched a lot of that game. And, they were blitzing him a lot. They were showing him all different looks. And they completely shut down the run game, which is one of the reasons why I like Baltimore. I thought that they, the thing about Washington this year is they were getting ahead of the sticks early with their run game with Brian Robinson, and they would get into third or fourth and really short, and they, continually converted because they have that run pass option with Daniels. But with the number one run defense on Baltimore's side, I figured that they would shut that down and it would force Daniels into a lot of third and longs, which they did. And he just kept coming back at him, and he was, making some really high leverage throws. He didn't scramble a lot or he didn't run a lot. So his EPA numbers were not propped up by, garbage time or late scrambling. It was all mainly in the pocket. And I thought he made some great throws. And so in that environment against a really tough, the pass defense isn't great for Baltimore, but, they do put pressure on you, and, they can make you look bad at times. I thought he really did a nice job of hanging in there when the game easily could have been a blowout. Lamar Jackson was throwing all over this defense. Derrick Henry, didn't produce a huge success rate, but he wore them down at the end. Yeah, they were scoring pretty much every drive, and he was coming back right at them. So I just, from a pure, ability to hang in a tough environment and, keep them in the game. He made a great fourth down touchdown throw to Terry McLaurin in the back of the end zone. It was in a perfect spot on fourth and goal from like the 12. It was not an easy position to be in. He hung in there and made a perfect throw. So some of that fourth down they're 10 for 10 in fourth downs. That's going to regress at some point, but he is just making all the right throws and great decisions. So just generally, I was really impressed. Like they couldn't get away from, or Baltimore could not pull away from Washington. And I thought they hung in there really well. And that was a spot they easily could have gotten blown out and lost by double digits. And, they didn't let it happen. So they impressed me just visually, watching that game and how he kept them in it. So I did really like, how he played just generally in that position.
Yeah, like I mentioned to start, like this is a game where for Washington, you lose by 7 as a team that against a great Baltimore Ravens team. It is still a win for Washington, but they're on the path where these aren't even going to be moral victories anymore if this team keeps playing at the way they're playing, especially with this young quarterback. Sumo, what about Jayden Daniels also impressed you? Also considering, Baltimore likes to throw the kitchen sink, especially at some younger quarterbacks, and he looked great. Tell me about your perspective on Jayden Daniels' performance on Sunday.
I can basically skip because TA said literally everything that I wanted to say. I'm actually higher on the Washington offense than before that game for all the things that TA has said. The question was, what happens when an opposing defense takes away the run, forces the offense to be one-dimensional, forces maybe Jayden Daniels to throw more into tight windows over the middle of the field. and he basically responded very well to all of that. So really, really impressed despite the, still think, deserved loss straight up and against the spread of the Commanders, but really, really impressed with what Daniels did.
Tia, you have another point about the Commanders you wanted to make. Talk to us.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I would love to see Daniels get a more playmaking tight end. I know they have Ben Sinnott, the rookie from Kansas State there, but Zach Ertz is just so slow. I feel like it would be great to have a weapon that can create some down the field, over the middle throws. And so I think a guy like Evan Ingram would be really interesting if they can get their hands on him. I don't know what the contract situation is, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I was just thinking of, the Jags are going to be selling off pieces soon. They have a very expensive roster. I'd love to see a guy like Evan Ingram stretch the field down the middle for Daniels. So, because there was a lot of times I was watching, and it was like, all right, he has a nice throw to Ertz, and a good, a tight end with good yak ability could separate and really make those big plays, and he wasn't able to do that. So I would love to see them attack the middle of the field a little bit more with a guy like Ingram, or even just give Sinnott some more chances, with his athletic ability.
Yeah, definitely giving Jaden Daniels a couple more weapons. Of course, Terry McLaurin is great, but he's not in this upper echelon of wide receivers by any means. And the rest of that pass catching core definitely could use some work. And this team has cap space and not that many players under contract, as well as Daniels, of course, on a rookie deal. So looking like a bright future for Washington. Let's just make sure Jaden Daniels stays healthy, stays upright, and avoids some big hits. He did take a couple sacks. Every time he gets hit, as a Commanders fan, I'm sitting there nervous, but hoping that Jaden Daniels is able to continue to stay healthy more than anything, because the talent is absolutely undeniable. But soon we're going to go back to you and talk about another undeniable talent who unfortunately went down with a gruesome-looking injury. I'm sure everybody saw it on X. If you're squeamish, you probably don't want to look at this, but Aiden Hutchinson for the Lions, who has put together one of the best seasons of any defender so far, unfortunately will miss the rest of the year. Talk to us about how impactful it is for Detroit to lose this stud pass rusher.
Yeah, it's absolutely brutal. Not only was Hutchinson on pace for DPOY this season, granted, he also faced a lot of backup right tackles, but he absolutely crushed them. So that's also a strength honor where honors due. So Hutch is a big time loss for the Lions because they have almost no depth behind him. They signed Marcus Davenport this season. He's already on IR. So it's getting really thin out there when your second edge guy is Josh Pascal. So I would not be surprised if the Lions did something at the trade deadline. TA mentioned Zadarius Smith. Would actually like that a lot. Brown season is close to being over. So yeah, I would be stunned if they don't try to get anything done prior to the trade deadline. I mean, losing arguably the best, top three at least, maybe best edge player this season is a brutal loss. And the thing with the Lions is that they want to play very aggressively on the back end. So they play a lot of man coverage this year, sticky coverage, and it really helps when there's a guy up front who completely disrupts basically every second passing play. So we'll see. I think it's a massive downgrade for the Lions because without a good pass rush, I'm not sure that their coverage structure will hold up that well.
Yeah, we might have to see some potentially gigantic scheme changes for Detroit. Obviously, don't want to change that too much, but when you have one of your key pieces in that machine, unfortunately, not going to be lost for the season, it obviously will have to change how Detroit does some things, and maybe they'll just go to the trade deadline or the trade market, But of course, Hutchinson's playing so well, not going to be easy to replicate that kind of production. But Jude, we're going to go to you. We're going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints. Now, Tampa Bay scored 51 points despite 3 Baker Mayfield interceptions. Now, this was a team that I know, Tia, you were down on coming into this year as they kind of ran it back from their good season last year and didn't really make too many upgrades. Lost their OC, but now Liam Cohen has come in. Clearly, he's pushing some right buttons, and Baker Mayfield, as a competitor, you have to give him a ton of the credit in the world. But what do you attribute this 51-point output more to? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers really being this great offense, as we see with no Rashad White, they could finally run the ball? Or is this Saints team of course, no Derek Carr changed things, though rather did look all right, but Is this more impressive for Tampa Bay to put up 51 or more concerning for New Orleans allowing 51?
I mean, it's both. I feel like, and I guess generally on the Tampa Bay side of things, I think kind of one of the major differences this year and last year is the run game. And this is a team that could not get anything going at all last year. And I think kind of most of the research kind of, or what people were saying heading into the season was like Baker Mayfield was playing at an unsustainable rate on 3rd and longs. Well, they're seeing far fewer 3rd and longs this year just by virtue of the run game. And I think that's kind of one of the major differences. Yeah, I mean, giving up 51 points, certainly a problem on the Saints side, though there were some defensive touchdowns, and especially so coming off the backs of Kansas City having their best offensive performance of the season in the weeks prior. And like Juju Smith-Schuster was going for 150 yards there, turning back the clock. I definitely would have some concerns on the Saints side of the ball, especially on defense. I think like Spencer Rattler made a bunch of mistakes, took too many sacks, but they moved the ball still relatively well. I think the offense is fine. The defense has kind of just been a disaster the past 2 weeks. But Tampa Bay, with the exception of a game that now kind of looks like a game against a Denver defense that was really solid, has been able to move the ball and put up points basically every week. I think they're a legitimate offense. They have, I think, the 3rd highest series success rate. That is rate of first downs per series. I think this is a legitimate offense and one I'm going to be monitoring going forward.
Certainly, Baker Mayfield, again, got to give him credit where it's due for this resurgence in Tampa. They've had the good old line. They obviously have the weapons, and things have been coming together for the Buccaneers. And they look a serious threat in the NFC. Of course, that's definitely lacking a little bit this season. And we're going to talk about a team right now in the NFC that I know, TA, you were high on. I was as well coming into this year. But the Seattle Seahawks dropped to 3-3 after a tough loss on Thursday night against the San Francisco 49ers. Tia, we'll start with you. We know that the Seahawks dealt with cluster injuries on their defensive line. Obviously, any team with cluster injuries anywhere is going to be tough to overcome. But outside of these cluster injuries, what else would you attribute to the Seahawks' downfall so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know if like scheme-wise, if you can really narrow it down. I mean, I think it's a combination of, I really do think the injuries matter. It's not like the defense was ultra talented and really deep to begin with. So when you lose, Reek Woolen, your number one cornerback, you lose, they lost another cornerback last week. They don't have a pass rush. Boye Mafe has been in and out of the lineup. Nowuso was back in for one game, and then, he missed last week. So, and you lose, Byron Murphy, your number one pick. So you've got a ton of guys out on the front four. You lose your top quarterback last week. And you're also, it's funny, the divergence of who you played offensively from the beginning of the season to the last 3 weeks is like night and day. You have, you're playing guys like Bo Nix and Skylar Thompson and Jacoby Brissett. Then you're jumping back into the Lions offense and the Niners offense. Even Daniel Jones played well. And also the fact that they've had just a crazy, brutal, road schedule. They've had, think about it. They started at home against Denver. Then they flew across country on Sunday to play the Patriots. And that was an overtime game. Fly all the way back home to play Miami. And then, fly all the way back to Detroit to play a Monday night game. That was a tough game, obviously, with the Lions. And then fly all the way back to Seattle on a short week to face the Giants, and then go on another short week to face the Niners. It was just, I think that's a lot of travel and just kind of a back and forth nature. 3 games in 11 days. I think that kind of all that on top of just a brutal schedule from the last 3 games. We're playing the Niners and Lions as part of that. I think this kind of all mixes into a very tough stretch here. So I believe in Mike McDonald. I think he knows what he's doing. He just needs the pieces, and he needs kind of a settled, normal schedule. I think he'll start to get that here coming up, where it's just not going to be all over the place. Although they do have to travel all the way to Atlanta, but at least they have extra rest now. But I think they'll be okay. They're not they're not an elite defense, and I never thought they'd be elite defense. I thought they just needed to be average, and they just needed to really improve their late down defense. That was one thing last year. They were pretty good. They were, league average in the on first and second downs, but on third and fourth downs, they were the worst in the NFL. And so they needed to fix that, at least normalize that a little bit. Their offense is good enough to win games if you have an average defense. And so that's really all I'm looking for, is just get back to health, get a little bit more normalized rest schedule and just be competent enough to let your offense outscore the opponent.
Certainly. And T, I know, I don't know if you tweeted this publicly, but on your great work that you do at cleveanalytics.com, make sure you check out TA's work. You mentioned the scheduling being so difficult for Seattle, especially that Thursday night situation of a rookie head coach playing in the first half of the season on Thursday Night Football with terrible against the spread numbers. We're not, again, trend better by any means, but situations do pop up, especially certain scheduling ones like we outlined. And it's been a tough ride for Seattle and what they've had to go through, and now sitting at 3-3. But you have some thoughts as well. What do you think has changed for Seattle, and kind of what are your thoughts on them moving forward? Is this team better than their 3-3 record, or is this just a middle of the pack team that, like TA mentioned, isn't all that talented, though they are just a solid team? But what are you seeing from Seattle, Suma?
A few things. So one more thought on the defense. I think for Mike McDonald, the biggest difference this year is not having Roquan Smith, but having Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson. Roquan Smith last year had, next to Fred Warner, arguably the best linebacker in the league last year. He's not as great this year. Maybe that's also correlated to not having Mike McDonald as his DC. However, he was incredible last year. And Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker are massive downgrades from what Roquan Smith was last year. So that's in part. Then you add the cluster injury at defensive line. Eugene Nwosu basically played like one quarter on IR already. And then on the offense, I think their biggest issue is that they don't have any floor. They cannot run the ball well on early downs. Their O-line does not hold up very well in pass protection. So they cannot run the ball well. They are not great moving the ball on early downs. It's basically, hey, Gino, give us something, throw to those three wide receivers out there and see what happens. And I think that will occasionally work very well, but it's not really a consistent long-term solution. And we will see. Maybe they can get a little bit healthier, especially at right tackle. Maybe they can figure out something schematically over the mini bye now. But those are my biggest concerns, because if they cannot run the ball well on early downs and they face a decent pass rush, that offense basically almost always relies on Geno Smith playing hero ball.
And Geno Smith playing hero ball is not what you want to see, especially with the offensive line playing pretty poorly as well. So definitely some things to monitor for Seattle moving forward. And we're going to finish up our takeaways with one last one before we go into some futures. But then we go into some Week 7 look-aheads and finish off with Monday Night Football. But last week we talked about the Giants' offense potentially being underrated after a great performance in Seattle. Now, Suma, let's talk about the Giants' defense. Is this unit underrated after seeing them play well against Seattle? And then, yes, they lost to Cincinnati, and that's a whole other issue with Daniel Jones in primetime. But at this point, Suma, could you make a case that the Giants' defense is also underrated?
I think so, and I'm really impressed by their pass rush. No, Kayvon Thibodeau and Joe Burrow was pressured all the time, all game long. I think that their defensive line is doing an incredible job. Obviously, it helps when you have arguably the best defensive tackle in the game right now in Dexter Lawrence. But when you look at metrics like pass rush above expected, which fantasy point charts, which is basically pressure rate adjusted by time to throw, they show up, I think, in the top 5 on the season. They're really doing a great job up front. Their secondary on paper is not great at all, but I think right now their D-line, their pass rush is so strong that they can mask some of the issues on the back end.
Yeah, definitely difficult for New York there, but at the same time, definitely some things to be excited about for this Giants team. Even at 2-4, they're really showing some signs of life, even after that loss last night. But John, let's start talking about some futures. But before we get into the futures, we got to shout out our sponsor, Fanduel Sportsbook. Kick off this NFL season with a win on Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Easily one of the best sportsbooks out there with such a great user interface. So easy to find the bets that you like. And right now, all customers get a profit boost every single NFL game day. That means you can pump up your gridiron winnings multiple times a week. Tonight, there is a same-game parlay bonus that you can use on FanDuel Sportsbook, and FanDuel has tons of ways you can get in on the NFL action. You can bet on money lines, spreads, player props, and more. Plus, with super simple live betting, lightning fast bet settlement, and instant withdrawals, FanDuel makes betting on the NFL easier than ever before. Visit FanDuel.com/forwardprogress to download FanDuel today, and you must be 21 plus and present in select states or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including token expiration. See terms for both offers at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. All right, guys. So let's look at some future markets to break down. Now, we already talked about Jaden Daniels, but we're going to double down on the Jaden Daniels love. And we're not just looking at offensive rookie of the year. We're going for the whole offensive player of the year market. TA, talk to us why you think Jaden Daniels at 50-1 to win offensive player of the year is a look in the futures market.
Yeah, so the last 5 years has been, that award has gone to the best non-quarterback. And the MVP has essentially been the default quarterback award. And that's essentially how it's been. Obviously, it's not like the comeback player of the year award where essentially the requirements, but essentially the spirit of the award had to be redefined for voters this year. It's just kind of been one of those things where the voters that's just how they've gravitated towards. So, but I think in this case, the reason I like it at this number is just, you look at him, Jaden Daniels has been awesome this year. He's going to have the best rookie season we've ever seen from an EPA perspective. But I don't think that they're good enough to get a number 1 or 2 seed or win 13 plus games, which you typically see from an MVP. But I do think 10, 11 wins is good upside there. And so if that's the case, they'll make the playoffs, but not be good enough to consider being in top consideration for MVP. So then you look at, okay, he'll win rookie of the year, but his numbers are going to be so good that I think people are going to want to reward that to some degree. And there are no receivers that are really, posting elite numbers. Nico Collins was up there, but he's going to miss 4 games. So he's essentially dropped out. Jamar Chase is playing well, but his numbers aren't, something that you typically win the award. Although I do have a little bit of exposure there on him. I just, I'm not sure Cincinnati could even make the playoffs at this point. Justin Jefferson's been fine, but you got Derrick Henry and you got Saquon Barkley. Barkley's going to drop off likely with the return of AJ Brown, and some of his numbers going to be diluted. So essentially, it's just Derrick Henry as the best non-quarterback right now. And if Lamar Jackson wins MVP, which he could at this point, are you really going to give Offensive Player of the Year to another player on the same team? I mean, that seems like it's a difficult thing to do. So, long story short, I just think the confluence of a rookie kind of coming out of nowhere to post, historically great numbers, but not MVP, not be on an MVP level team, at the same time having a very few number of non-quarterbacks as candidates for player of the year. I think it gives him at least an outside shot, at least a better than the 50-1 shot that is out there right now. So, it would take some work, and obviously you need voters to kind of change the way that their voting patterns. But I don't think it's impossible. And I just think at this number, it's worth the shot because it looks like it's heading in that direction. And if Derrick Henry gets hurt or if he falls off a little bit as the schedule gets a little more difficult, then maybe Daniels can leap up there. So it'll take a groundswell of support, but I just felt like at that number, and this is kind of an outlier year from that perspective, I thought it made some sense.
And Jaden Daniels has the Carolina Panthers on his schedule as a 7.5-point favorite for a rookie quarterback this upcoming week. Obviously, that's probably a big number to lay, but at the same time, he could certainly bring this number down with another big performance, albeit against the lowly Panthers. But let's flip to the defensive side of the ball now that Aiden Hutchinson, unfortunately, is out of this race. Tia, you have a look for this market as well. talk to us about another candidate for the defensive player of the year that you're now eyeing, with Hutchinson unfortunately missing the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, Hutchinson was running away with this thing, and obviously the unfortunate injury, opens things up. I think TJ Watt's the leader right now, which is interesting. I was looking up some of his numbers, and I quizzed the guys in the chat about how many pressures do we think he has this year, and I was stunned. He only has 15 pressures. Aiden Hutchinson has 45. He leads the NFL. So Watt is barely inside the top 50 when it comes to pressures, but he does have the sacks, and he does have the splash plays. What he has, 5 sacks, and he's got 3 forced fumbles. So from a kind of a splash play perspective, he's up there, and he's clearly a dominant player, but some of those pressure to sack numbers are going to regress, I think, to the point where, and he's probably going to get double teamed more without Highsmith out there on the other side. So I do think that he might fall off a little bit. I think a guy like Nick Bosa, 18-1 makes some sense. Obviously he's got the name recognition. He's second in the league in pressures. He has a really nice 17% pressure rate, which is 5th in the league. But he's only translated that into 3 sacks. And so some of that is just, bad luck. You're just not converting your pressures into sacks. His pressure to sack ratio is just 9%, which, typically, 16% is like, kind of middle, median average level in terms of sack conversions. Historically, for his career, he's at 16%. He's never been below 13%. So I think some of those pressures should eventually start turning into sacks, you would think, just by natural regression and the fact that he's a really good player. So I think if you do that, normalize that, some of his sack numbers will increase. He already has an interception against Kyler Murray. I know he's got at least 1 forced fumble. So he's going to need a couple more splash plays, and the Niners obviously to win the division. But I think at this price, and now that it's a little bit more wide open, I think he does have a real shot at winning this award.
Certainly a great case there. But Judah, we're going to look at the same market, but we're going to go deeper down the board, obviously, now with things clearly opening up. Who's your look now for Defensive Player of the Year with this market shaping up to, again, not including Hutchinson anymore?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Trey Hendrickson at 45-1. I think if you just kind of look at the list of guys ahead of him, I think, right, TA made the case for TJ Watt, who's having a down year, I think, relative to his standards. Pat Surtain is there at 25%. Pat Surtain is hurt. It's an interesting move there. I don't think at this point, I mean, if Deron Bland wasn't even getting considered last year for Defensive Player of the Year after having 6 pick sixes, I think it's going to be a real kind of uphill battle for a non-edge player really to win this award, or at least a cornerback. Maybe with the advance of places like PFF that can kind of grade players, we'll see some more of those. But it's really hard to quantify, especially for we're voting on an award here, right? This isn't some kind of abstract notion of the truth of who's actually the best player. These are kind of predictable in the types of things that voters are looking for. So to the Trey Hendrickson case here, I think that this is a guy who I actually disagree with you. We're going to do this thing again where I disagree with TA and it gets all blown out. I don't think TJ Watt's pressure to sack rate kind of follows the normal curve of a pressure to sack rate because of the types of pressures that he tends to generate. It's not a coincidence that he leads the league in forced fumbles every year. Some pretty cool research on this and the types of pass rush moves that he does. I think Trey Hendrickson's another one of those players who constantly kind of has more sacks than his pressures would indicate. And I think this year in particular, I heard something called these pressure disruptions, which are plays that a defensive lineman or an edge player basically gets to the quarterback before the quarterback can go through his progressions. And that type of pressure is far more valuable to a defense than a non-disruption pressure. A non-disruption pressure has a 0.7 expected points added per play, 0.07. That's a little bit better than league average. These disruption pressures are -5. It's because those are the types of plays that are kind of the more valuable pressures and the ones that most often lead to sacks. And Hendrickson is top 3 in that mark. Aiden Hutchinson was far and away the best player in that category before he got hurt. So I think you kind of have a confluence of a few things. Number one, this is a guy who's 2 sacks off the mark. We have a lot of edge injuries this year. Your regulars like Michael Parsons, he's hurt. Myles Garrett's having a down year. I do think TJ Watt is having a down year, even if his kind of pressure to sack stuff won't translate. He's got, I think, a decent shot at leading the league in sacks and certainly at causing a lot of these disruption pressures that will lead to a lot of these kind of really negative outcomes. At 45-1, given where the rest of the market currently stands, I think this is some pretty solid value.
You always have to, of course, consider the rest of the field. And also it is, like Judah mentioned, an award. A lot of things go into that, of course, voting, etc. But those are a couple of takes right there. Again, I'll run it back. Daniels, Offensive Player of the Year from TA, 50-1, worth a sprinkle. Nick Bosa, Defensive Player of the Year, 16-1. And then Trey Hendrickson there at 45-1. But John, let's get to week 7 before we head into this Monday Night Football matchup. And there are a couple of injury things to look at, as well as some just straight up good football games that we want to monitor. But let's start with the Arizona Cardinals and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, the Chargers taking a win in Denver, but one of the issues is that their defensive back group is not necessarily looking so great after a couple of injuries. Then on the flip side, Marvin Harrison Jr. going out with a concussion for Arizona. I actually am not sure who mentioned in the chat, so whoever that was can hop in with their major thoughts. But what are our thoughts on those Chargers with their defensive back injuries, and then now the Cardinals missing Marv in a spread that Arizona is now currently 2.5-point home underdogs, and the total is sitting at 43.5.
I think that was too much to talk about. I mean, I know that Chargers have a bunch of defensive back injuries, but I don't know if Suma wanted to talk about that.
Yes, Over got crushed earlier today from 41.5-ish to 43.5. I think that move makes sense when you consider all the injuries from yesterday. Chargers right now basically have their top 4 cornerbacks close to being out. Asante Samuel is on IR. Fulton and Leonard left with a hamstring injury, and Jazir Taylor was inactive. So there's actually a chance that they might be without their top 4-ish cornerbacks. And on the Joey Bosa did not play. Might be back next week, but also something to monitor. I'm not sure whether he's close to 100%. And Arizona, Kazir White left yesterday. Sean Murphy-Bunting left with a neck injury. Joey Blount, Thomas, another defensive back. They're also banked up along the offensive line, but both defenses are dealing with injuries. Marvin Harrison is also another question mark, but with this game being on a Monday, he actually has one more day to clear. I think concussion protocol is pretty much close to 50-50, but with one more day, probably lean towards him playing rather than not. But concussion protocol is always tricky.
Certainly with concussions, definitely seen some things with players coming back too quickly, other players missing more time than anticipated. But John, we have a massive matchup, and for some reason, it is not on prime time. Instead, we're going to get the Steelers and Jets on prime time this week instead of the Super Bowl rematch with the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Kansas City Chiefs, with the 49ers laying 1.5, a total of 47.5 for this matchup. TA, talk to us about how you are viewing this one and where you think the market's going to settle eventually in this Chiefs-Niners matchup.
I think it's a great question. I don't know. I think it's going to ping pong back and forth if I had to guess, but I do think Kansas City will get support. Andy Reid off a bye. And you've got San Francisco off extra rest too. I'll be curious to see if Jordan Mason plays. I think obviously without McCaffrey, they're getting pretty thin there. And he left the last game. So we'll see if he's able to play. I know Shavarius Ward didn't play last game either. So it'd be good to get him back. The defense has been susceptible. So, that could be an opportunity for Kansas City. And obviously the Chiefs have matched up really well with San Francisco the last handful of times they played, obviously being in the Super Bowl. And then even in the regular season in San Francisco 2 years ago, the Chiefs went in and blasted them. So the Chiefs seem to have their number. I don't know. It's like one of those where you're going to hear all week about, can't bet against Mahomes as an underdog. So I do think just generally, more likely than not that, it'll be more picked to maybe the Chiefs get some money here. I don't know. It's a tough game. I don't have a strong opinion. I just am more fascinated to see how it settles in. And I think you'll see this game along with some other, high profile games, you'll see support on both sides and good cases made on both sides. So, maybe end up being one of those where if you can get a Chiefs and a teaser, in this range. That could be just your best outcome is, get Mahomes over a touchdown. But I'm just more interested to see how kind of where this lands. This is kind of in line with what we were at the Super Bowl, and obviously no McCaffrey for San Francisco, and this is obviously in San Francisco instead of a neutral field, so probably right in that same range.
Yeah, certainly a big point to make. Suma mentioned last week talking about the 49ers red zone issues that were still pretty paramount last week. And if you ask me, if you're giving Patrick Mahomes as an underdog, I thank everybody because I'll gladly go down on the Mahomes ship any day of the week. But I know Suma and Judah have thoughts here. Judah, talk to us about your thoughts on this Niners-Kansas City matchup.
Yeah, don't have much on the kind of side here, but I do think the total's a bit low right now, especially when you consider that both these teams are relatively healthy, or at least should be, kind of off the full bye for the Chiefs and kind of the mini bye for the Niners. I think there's kind of a lot of past and priors kind of going into the pricing of each of these defenses. The Chiefs obviously were a terrific defense last year. They've kind of been a little bit more fragile this year. I don't think that really matters anyway when you're going up against an offense as good as the Niners, where kind of when you look at where these two things intersect of like, say, a 90th percentile offense in the Niners going up against like 75th percentile of a defense, these things don't kind of just like subtract from each other in the same way that it would be as teams are closer to 50%. So I think there's kind of an advantage there. And even just looking at the Chiefs have kind of had a little bit of a script flip, if you will. They, for the past like 7 years, have been very, very vulnerable against the run, but pretty stout against the pass. So we've actually kind of seen that flip. They're like top 10 in kind of most run efficiency metrics and are middle of the pack on defense. This is a Niners team that is extremely explosive. And
we lost him.
Like lost Judah for a second, but Suma, you mentioned you have a stat you wanted to mention for this one. Talk to us.
I just looked it up because TA said Patrick Mahomes is an underdog. Patrick Mahomes as an underdog, 12-3-1 against the spread since coming to the season. Just leaving this right here.
That's simple. And as somebody again who, when I saw going into the playoffs last year, that the Chiefs were 10-1 to win the Super Bowl the week before the playoffs, and Mahomes was a dog right then and there. I personally got into that train every single week. But Judah, you're back. Hit you on that thought.
Yeah, I don't know where I lost you guys, but I think what it comes down to is a Chiefs defense that's very different, both in terms of their production and also the way that teams are attacking them. Whereas they were very vulnerable against the run, I think that's kind of flipped. These are the types of little factors that I think play into things like totals a little bit more. More passes equals more completions, more plays, more kind of yards per play. I think teams are going to attack them via the pass. And on the flip side, this is obviously each of these offenses can score. It's a Niners defense, which is pretty vulnerable. The Chiefs offense is getting going. I think they're in a good spot off, as we know all the Andy Reid post-buy stuff. I don't think it's about that. I mean, that obviously matters, but this is an offense that can score against a pretty vulnerable defense. Both these teams are going to be passing 47.5, given the current scoring environment. I think is a little bit too low.
And not to get too much.
Bring out the good plays, right? Andy Reid brings out the good plays for a game like
right,
this.
Right, obviously. Yeah, there's good plays and bad plays. It's totally how it works.
And I was about to mention, too, we know Mahomes is seeing all the hate on Twitter. Oh, his EPA is so low. He's not a good quarterback. We got to quantify that into this a little bit. The Mahomes narrative game on the narrative streets. I got to prove everybody wrong. Of course, I kid. But, of course, again, the stats we just mentioned there. And, of course, we know how good Mahomes, Reid, and co. are and can be. Not something you normally want to bet against, especially when it comes down to crunch time. But we have a massive game in the NFC North playoff it's going to be for the division potentially down the line. The Minnesota Vikings hosting the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, of course, with a massive win in Dallas, but as we discussed, losing Aiden Hutchinson. And right now the Vikings laying 1.5 at home, total 49.5, as we know both of these teams can explode offensively. We're going to go to you, Suma. What are your thoughts on the opening market in this Vikings-Lions game?
And pretty much where I expected this spread to hang around, at least early. For the Vikings, Aaron Jones was on the practice field today. Dalton Risner, I think, I don't know whether he was activated or he's supposed to be activated. And Detroit, obviously, the big one is losing Aiden Hutchinson. Vikings out of the bye week, maybe interested to see whether they might make a few adjustments on offense. However, I think that this game might bounce between like 1.5 to 2.5. I don't think it's going to get to 3. I think there's going to be a wall of purple money at some point. Got bet up most recently while we were on the show. Very, very interesting game. But I think from an injury perspective, we're really not looking at too many things here.
Definitely, we'll just have to see how this line ends up materializing as we get closer to kickoff. New information, limits rise, etc. We're going to get to Monday Night Football and a same game parlay very shortly. We have 2 more games we want to cover for Week 7, and we're going to start actually going to Thursday Night Football. We have the Sean Payton revenge game as the Denver Broncos head to New Orleans. Of course, Spencer Rattler will be under center for New Orleans, but also some injuries, specifically to the Saints. Chris Olave going down, that's their number 1 receiver. On the Broncos side, Pat Surtain, their number 1 corner. Judah, what do you think this market is? How do you think this market's going to mature, considering these injuries or just in general, considering the matchup between these 2 teams?
Who knows? I mean, this is about as ugly a spot, I think, as we'll get. Bo Nix is basically just running around. He's had an outrageously high time to throw last week. I think those injuries do matter. The Broncos play a ton of man coverage. Where we've talked about this before, kind of the talent kind of plays out where good corners will beat lesser wide receivers and vice versa. And Pat Surtain's one of the best in that area. If you kind of just replicate that with a bad wide receiver, that's a little bit of a recipe for trouble. But yeah, I honestly don't have the strongest of thoughts on this one. I think you got a Broncos defense, which has been very solid. A Saints team, which is a real wild card, and the defense has been really bad. But is the Broncos offense good enough to kind of take advantage of that? I'm not so sure. I think this is probably priced about right. It's an ugly game, and certainly not one given all of the uncertainty that I'm looking to bet on Monday.
Yeah, followed up a fun Thursday Night Football game last week with I guess we'll see. Anything's possible.
This is a classic. Thursday Night Football is not supposed to be high caliber games. It's supposed to be Jaguars Titans when both teams are terrible.
But wait a minute, Judah, did you like? I mean, we like Spencer Rattler's arm, right? Like that's good for your king on the deep ball, right?
Sure. I mean, we always love Rashid Shaheed, and maybe there's an SGP build to be had here. But kind of when you're looking, he's going to take a ton of sacks. That's a problem. I don't think it's ideal for him to be playing quarterback right now in Week 7 of 2024. I don't think that was the plan.
No,
I'm not gonna lie. I thought he looked better yesterday than Bo Nix has looked all year, in any game all year. In that one game, maybe I'm a little different.
Yeah, it looks like you got thoughts on this game. You got more thoughts than I do. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I don't have a ton of thoughts. I was just, Olave is likely to be out with a concussion. Same with Surtain. So it's probably advantage Saints taking off Surtain versus Olave. I'll take that trade. I don't know how you could lay points with Spencer Rattler right now against anybody, but I just love I like his arm, and he was a high recruit coming out of high school. So going to Oklahoma and South Carolina. So I just thought I thought he made some really nice throws yesterday. And at worst, you could at least, drop him back and unwind some deep balls to Shaheed. So, I don't love either one of these teams right now, but I do think it's pretty interesting, Rattler's future there and how he plays the next few weeks. It'll be interesting on a short week too, if they can get him ready for this defense. But I just wanted to throw those 2 cents in there because I know you say it's going to be an ugly game, but I know Shaheed's going to find his way into your SGP somehow. So you're definitely going to be watching.
Yeah, Rashid Shaheed, so much fun to watch. Such a great player who's just developed since coming into the league. And that 37.5 total, maybe it's not safe. Maybe we get a punt return and then a deep ball to Shaheed, and that's 14 right there. We're moving the sticks. But one more game before Monday Night Football. Another game where we want to mention some injuries. Jordan Mailata for the Philadelphia Eagles officially ruled out. Also, if we look at Dallas Goedert for the Eagles and Darius Slay on the Giants side. But TA, right now with this game sitting at the Giants +3 at home, 43.5 total against the Eagles team that barely squeaked out that win against your lowly Cleveland Browns. Talk to us, TA, about your thoughts on the Giants-Eagles game.
Not a ton of thoughts. I mean, I think the line's about right. I think, about what Cincinnati closed at, if you consider Neighbors likely to play. So it's a little bit lower. I don't know. The Eagles were not very impressive, and they're going to go up against another really strong defensive front in the Giants. And so, they'll have opportunities down the field with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but no Goddard hurts a little bit, and no Mailata will be a problem against that front. So I think the Giants front will keep them in it. And obviously, if Neighbors is back and can make some plays down the field, the one thing that the Giants are lacking right now without him is no down the field threat at all, or at least Daniel Jones doesn't even try to take a shot down the field. I don't think they completed anything more than 15 yards yesterday. So they're going to have to push the ball down the field a little bit more. But this Eagles defense was not very impressive either. They made, I didn't say it made Deshaun Watson looked decent yesterday in the second half, but they weren't all that impressive. So I do think the Giants can stay in this. I think the 3.5 is right over in the range that I'd be looking, but no major thoughts either way. I mean, the injuries are a concern though for the Eagles.
Certainly never want to be losing a starting OL, like you said, especially against a good defensive front. But John, let's talk some Monday Night Football. The New York Jets hosting the Buffalo Bills, and we've seen a lot of movement, whether that is just general market sentiment liking the Jets. Of course, we have the Robert Saleh firing, the Greg Olbrich promotion, the play calling changing hands from Hackett to Downing. And we're going to start with you, Suma, as our resident Jets fan on the show. Talk to us about your thoughts on Bills-Jets tonight.
Well, teams with a players-only meeting are 1-0 ATS on the week with the Bengals yesterday. We'll see if we can make it 2-0. Aside from a potential motivational or great motivational spot for the Jets, it's I tweeted about it today. It's actually, in my opinion, the most important Jets game since week 17, 2015, because with a win, you are in the first place in the division, which is pretty ridiculous to think about. And if you lose this game, you are basically down by 3 games against Buffalo. Everyone will laugh at you. Coaching change didn't matter and whatever. I actually also think that the Jets have a decent matchup on offense because the Bills were extremely limited the last 2 games because their wide receivers really struggled to create separation. And now with DJ Reed, who's playing at a very high level this year, Sauce Gardner, I also don't think that they will create too much separation on the outside. Khalil Shakir, 50-50 whether he plays. I've read that if he plays, he will be on a snap count, and they might use him differently this week because of the injury. And he would have been a great matchup weapon because Michael Carter, slot cornerback for the Jets, will be out today. So overall, I think that the Bills really don't have a great matchup. I think the Jets will try to collapse the pocket, will try to play tight coverage and really force Josh Allen in a lot of tight window throws to guys like Mac Hollins and Keenan Coleman. And we're also having some winds in the forecast. Sustained winds are around 14, 15 miles per hour. Not that big, but gusts might be as high as 35, 40 today. So that might actually have an impact on the passing game. Total is also only around 41.5. So yeah, I don't think it's a great matchup for the Bills passing attack. And on the other side, I also think that for as bad as the Jets offense has looked, it's tough to expect a spark with that play calling change to Todd Downing. But I think that the Jets might have somewhat of an easier game today after playing the Denver Broncos and the Minnesota Vikings. The Bills defense are also doing more stuff compared to last year, compared to recent years. But think they are not as wonky as the Denver Broncos and Vikings defense are. So overall, I somewhat still lean towards the Jets at the current number.
Leading Jets after seeing some of that movement. Tia, you viewing this game similarly as Suma?
Yeah, I'm on the Jets as well at 2.5, but I think 1.5 is still okay. I think they win outright, but a lot of the same things Suma mentioned. I think, potentially without Shakir, we've seen the last 2 weeks. I mean, Josh Allen's had, I think he's second or third worst in terms of success rate the last 2 games, 34 and 31% in the 2 games against Baltimore and Houston, which is the lowest, at least going into yesterday, the lowest success rate that any quarterbacks had against those 2 defenses. So on an apples to apples basis, he's been really bad. And then you had the fact that James Cook may or may not play because of the turf toe. If he does play, he's going to be hobbled. And they need some explosive capabilities if you're not going to have Shakir in there. So Cook being out could potentially be an issue, obviously in the pass game as well. And then just historically, I mean, the Jets have played very well against Josh Allen. It's going to be the same. I'm sure it's the same defensive structure they've had the last couple of years. But he's at 3 negative EPA games in the last 4 starts against the Jets. Even going back before then. He's generated a negative EPA 26 times out of 107 career starts, and 4 of those have come against the Jets, more than any other opponent. So they clearly have a way of handling Allen, even with a better offense, better weapons in the past. So now, without potentially Cook and Shakir, I think it's going to be a problem for Buffalo to score here. And you just look at, Aaron Rodgers has obviously struggled, but he's faced maybe the 2 best defenses in the NFL the last 2 weeks with the Vikings and Broncos, the 2 most blitz heavy teams in the NFL as well. So that's clearly an issue for Rodgers of late. He's, taking a lot of sacks, and obviously with the issue with the cadence and, play calling, running down the clock, that's been an issue. But the Bills blitz at the lowest rate in the NFL right now. And their secondary isn't all that great. So I do think that there's, this is a little bit of a breather from a defensive standpoint that this offense is going to face. And they're also facing a much worse run defense than they have the last couple of weeks as well. Breece Hall hasn't done anything the last 2 weeks, but Buffalo is not nearly as good against the run as both Minnesota and Denver. So I do think from that standpoint, there are some advantages for the Jets. I think being at home matters. I think they'll have some opportunities both in the pass game and in on the ground against his defense, and then vice versa. Like they can, seems like they've got a nice game plan historically for Josh Allen, and he's got a much worse set of weapons. So I do think that the Jets make sense here at this number.
2 votes of confidence for the new look New York Jets. Judah, you of course have some thoughts. Of course, you're going to cook with Sim Game Parlay. Get right into it for us.
Yeah, I don't have any thoughts, or I shouldn't say I don't have any. I definitely have thoughts. I don't have any kind of conviction in one side or another. I think, I guess, if I were to play kind of devil's advocate to TA's points, like, sure, Josh Allen's had kind of 2 back-to-back games, bad back-to-back games before, but I don't think we learned anything new about this Bills team. I think it is equally likely that he will return to the first 3 weeks version of the team. Of the Bills, rather than the last 2 weeks. I think it's kind of like we're throwing our hands up if we're choosing one of those samples over the other, unless Khalil Shakir is really this like massive weapon that the Bills need, which I guess is possible. I think you can kind of make clear cases for both sides, but to the SGP angle, I think the Bills are an interesting team to attack on the SGP front because the target distribution against the Bills is very, very distinct in that they really filter targets to running backs and tight ends. This is a team that is allowing the 3rd fewest targets to wide receivers. I disagree. I think they actually have a very good secondary. And what we know about Aaron Rodgers is that he's a guy who likes to kind of spread the ball around, even if that means kind of feeding targets to Allen Lazard and Mike Williams. Granted, last week he kept on, as he was being blitzed, kept on looking to Garrett Wilson. I think that's a bit more of a function of like first read off a blitz thing. And to TA's point, this is not a Bills defense which blitzes a lot. So I think we're going to see some dispersed targets. That is to say that I like the Garrett Wilson under here and kind of pairing that with Aaron Rodgers to still pass the ball. I think that this is a Jets The market is certainly pricing the Jets' run offense at a premium, and of course, Breece Hall can break off a big run at any point. But I think their run issues stem a lot deeper than just the teams that they've played. They're not creating kind of what's called like perfectly blocked runs. They're dead last in that category. They're dead last in yards before contact. This is a rush offense that I think their inability to run the ball has more to do with some systemic issues than it is the opponents they face. That is to say that I think that whereas the market is pricing this Jets run offense to get going by virtue of a relatively easy matchup against the Bills, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. And I think that the Jets are going to turn a bit more to the pass. And when they do pass, I think it's not going to go to Garrett Wilson, who's projected to get most of Aaron Rodgers' yardage, but I think it's going to be a little more dispersed. And I think especially Tyler Conklin is very intriguing against the Bills defense that is bleeding production to opposing tight ends. Conklin's seen the field on most passing snaps. He's way ahead of Jeremy Ruckert in routes run and all of those metrics, and his prices are quite depressed in this spot. So I think if we get something like Aaron Rodgers 250, Garrett Wilson under 58.5, Tyler Conklin 60 yards, telling the story of the Jets passing offense having a mildly successful day, and that going not through Garrett Wilson, but kind of dispersed targets and led by Tyler Conklin as well. That's very intriguing. If Fanduel had offered some Breece Hall alts beyond 25 yards, I think that's an appealing look as well. But a little something for Monday Night Football.
Definitely like that look. So, like Judah mentioned, they're not expecting another 23 target game for Garrett Wilson like we saw in London last week. Definitely more dispersed, but great look right there. And somebody mentioned in chat, Connor, that lives about 15 minutes from MetLife, and it's very windy outside. Of course, we're passing to the backs. I'm expecting, is it fair to say you're expecting some yak, Judah, or how are you breaking that down with the wind?
Yeah, I think, okay, so I mean, I also live very close to MetLife. I don't know, Eric, if you felt the wind today too. It is definitely windy. I think kind of looking at the forecast, 15 miles per hour is like just about the range where we see deep balls kind of get influenced. If anything, it helps the case. I think this is a Jets team that's going to, I'm basically saying they want to attack the intermediate areas of the field where the wind matters a little bit less. 15 mile per hour winds on a 10-yard curl or a 10-yard crosser is not going to make a difference. 15 miles per hour on a 30-yard ball that has a bunch of air, maybe that's kind of where we start to see it. I'm not too concerned. And if anything, it kind of, the market has definitely moved on the passing props. I've seen like Josh Allen's yardage is down 10 yards. Aaron Rodgers is similarly down like 8 yards. So I do think that the market's kind of selling a bit much. And I think that only adds to our angles here.
No, very well said, which is why I wanted to mention that, because, of course, I was expecting a nice rebuttal from you there, and very well said there, Judah, so thank you for that. And that's going to wrap it up for everybody. On behalf of Judah, Suma, TA, and myself, we appreciate every single listener. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the content. Best way to help us grow. And we will be back same time, same place next week. But, of course, the Hammer Betting Network and Forward Progress has shows all week long. So subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. We appreciate you guys, and best of luck with your wagers this week.